you're a kid, I don't know that there's many more things that are as exciting as getting to go and stay in a hotel. I don't know why that's the case necessarily, but I can remember as a kid being so excited when my parents would say, hey, we're going to go on this trip, and we're going to be staying at a hotel tonight. And I'd just be so excited about that because you're just getting a chance to sleep somewhere differently. Now, as an adult, I have my reservations about hotels. I want to know things like cleanliness factor. Mandy, to this day, every hotel we ever go in, she has to immediately take the bed sheets off, check for bugs, and then she can sleep soundly, and it'll be fine. But as a kid, you're so excited to just go to this new place that you're going to just sleep at and have all this fun. And the hotel experience is made only cooler as a kid if it has a pool. I can remember when I was about 5 years old or so, my parents brought me to a hotel, and I should probably tell you before I get too much further in this, I was something of a reckless child. Like I was an adventurous young lad. There was nothing too high for me to jump off of. There was no hill I wouldn't roll down. I seem to live under the philosophy that I'm here for a good time, not for a long time. And in fact, I am keenly proud of every gray hair my father currently has because I am responsible for each and every one of them. But I can remember when I was about 5 years old, my parents brought us to a hotel. I don't remember where we were going. I don't remember what we were doing. I don't really care anymore either. But I remember walking into the lobby, and my parents get us all checked in, and we start to make our way to the elevators. And to get to the elevators, we had to pass by the pool. And I was excited. So excited, in fact, that I took off like a shot, and I was running full bore, headed straight for the deep end. And just as I was about to start making my way to start the jump to go into there, I felt these giant hands grab me on both sides and pull me away. Because I probably should tell you, I hadn't had a single swimming lesson yet at all. And those giant hands belonged to my father, who had somehow been able to catch up to me, which watching my dad run was always a sight. It was a lot of fun to see. But at that point in time, my parents made the decision that tonight is probably a good time for Brandon to have his first swimming lesson. And so my dad, we went upstairs and we both changed into our swim trunks, and he brought me back down, and he got into the pool first, this time on the shallow end, coward. And he just kind of stood there, and he told me to come out there with him, and I remember my dad holding me up flat, like I was laying with my belly to the whole thing, and he's holding me out like this, and he's telling me, now when you're going to swim, the most important thing is to not go down. And the best way to make that happen is to constantly be kicking and flailing your arms, getting yourself to the point where you're constantly in motion so that way you can't sink. And so he had me, just as he held me like that, just keep kicking, keep doing the whole swim thing. And he'd give me tips and pointers like, no, don't do this. You're not going to get very far. You're not a dog. Just giving me little tips and pointers along the way to make sure that I knew what I was doing. And after we'd done this for about maybe 20, 25 minutes or so, my dad decided, or at least that's what it felt like to a 5-year-old. It was probably more like 5. Dad decided that it was time for me to finally try to go on my own. And so he said, now we're going to do this. You got to keep moving or else things are not going to go well for you. And I was just kicking and flailing as hard as I possibly could as my dad was slowly dropping his arms. And when I finally felt them give way, man, it was the coolest thing ever. I sank like a stone. And I can clearly, just like it was yesterday, I can clearly remember coming up out of the water with my dad grabbing me. And I'm coughing and I'm hacking and I've just nearly drowned. And my dad's laughing. I didn't see what the joke was, but Dad seemed to think this was the funniest thing that could have happened ever for me. And he told me that we needed to try again. Now, I wasn't exactly thrilled to be trying again because I just had one near-death experience. I didn't think I needed 2 that night. But Dad said it's really important, even when you fail in things, to keep going because the best way for you to learn is not through me telling you what to do. It's for you to experience it for yourself. I'm a firm believer that education and learning is a very important thing in our lives, and I think that as long as we live, we should be actively trying to learn, to the point that I live by the motto, if you go through an entire day without learning anything, then that's a day you truly wasted. Education is important, but education will never be topped by experience. Because it's one thing to learn something over and over and over again, to be taught something, and we go through school, we go through life, and we're taught all sorts of things, but it doesn't matter if we don't experience it. Education is only going to get us so far without experience. When the thing that you've learned about is suddenly real and happening right in front of you, it begins to take on a brand new life of its own. You can read book after book or watch movie after movie about what it's like for people to fall in love, and that's great. But when you fall in love for yourself for the very first time, it takes on a whole new meaning, a whole new depth of understanding, and it makes those things make more sense to you. You can be taught over and over again, like what's the important way to hold a drill or how to build something with your hands, but until the drill's in your hand and the project's about to get started, everything that you've been taught doesn't really matter until this moment. Because now it is something that is real, it is something that is tangible, it is something that is happening right in front of us. Learning is one thing, experiencing is something else entirely. Myself, I saw hundreds, if not thousands, of images of the state of Alaska and all the glaciers and all that good stuff that's up there, but man, none of it compared to when I was actually able to get up there myself and see it firsthand and experience what that was like. I had probably watched a dozen or more videos on glaciers. I remember learning about them in school, but I was actually standing in front of one and hearing the little creaks and the cracks as it was slowly making its movement and feeling the waves of cold hit me from it. It was totally different than what anything I'd ever learned before, because now I was experiencing it for the first time. You can be taught about all these different things. You can see pictures, you can see videos of them, but until you experience it for yourself, it's never really going to click with you or connect with you. And I think that for this generation of Israelites that we're going to be talking about today, they're about to discover this for the first time themselves. We're going to find ourselves in Joshua chapter 3, so if you want to turn there in your Bibles, that'd be great. I'd appreciate it. But while you're doing there, I think we need to kind of touch base a little bit further back, because last week we kind of left things for Moses as a bit of a downer, and Moses has been through a lot with us over the last 10 weeks, and so it kind of feels like a shame to just leave him at, you're not going to the promised land, na-na-na-boo-boo. But if you recall from last week, the reason why Moses is not going to lead the people of Israel into the promised land is because of one small moment in his life, one moment where his anger and frustration boil over and gets the best of him, and it caused him to do something other than what God commanded him to do. And so because of that one simple moment, Moses, who has committed his entire adult life for the last 40 plus years to leading the people of Israel, is not going to get to finish the job. His entire life had been building to being able to lead the people into the promised land, but because of this one moment, Moses was not allowed to do so. Now, Moses had kind of spent some time investing in a young man by the name of Joshua. In fact, we actually first are introduced to Joshua in Exodus 17, and we're kind of given the impression that from that point on, the mentorship of Moses to Joshua begins to take place. And he spends years telling him what's going to happen. And I assume that especially since he knows he's not going to be leading the people into the promised land, that leadership, that mentorship is becoming more poignant. Because he knows that Joshua is going to be the one to take over for me. Joshua is going to be the one who's going to be the one to take them into the promised land. He's the one who's going to lead these people where I can't. And so he's investing all this time of teaching them of what it means to lead these people. And I have to imagine that a sizable chunk of that leadership training included what to do if they decide they want to go back to Egypt, because that came up so many times in the last 10 weeks. We were better off as slaves. Over and over again. So you got to think that Moses is like, they're going to bring it up. It's going to happen. Here's how you smack them without actually smacking them. But these two kind of begin to point it out. But the book of Deuteronomy itself, it actually reads as Moses' final speech to the people of Israel. He has spent his entire adulthood, this last 40 plus years, leading these people. And you can't, no matter how much people might drive you nuts, if you're leading people, you can't help but care about them. And so this speech had to mean more to Moses than anybody else. And as he's winding down his speech, Moses doesn't sound remorseful about the idea that he's not going to lead them into the promised land. He doesn't seem to think that it's unfair or unjust of God for him not to be the one to do this. Instead, the last few verses of Moses' speech, Moses sounds incredibly hopeful for the future of these people that he cares about. In fact, the last verse of his speech in Deuteronomy 33, as he's giving his final blessing to the people that he has faithfully led, he would say in verse 29, "Happy are you, O Israel. Who is like you, a people saved by the Lord, the shield of your help and the sword of your triumph? Your enemies shall come fawning to you, and you shall tread upon their backs." This is a man who is not regretting the fact that he's not going to take them in there. He is excited about what they're about to experience. He knows that even though he can't be there for them, that their future is bright. And so he wants to send them off with a blessing that showcases how bright that future is going to be. And because Moses was such a faithful servant of God, because God loved Moses, even though Moses can't lead the people into the promised land, God does give him one final gift. And we see it in Deuteronomy 34, verses 1 through 5. It says this, "Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negeb and the plain, that is the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zor. And the Lord said to him, 'This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there.'" And then in verse 5 it says this, "So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord." Moses wasn't allowed to take the people over there. He wasn't allowed to enter the land himself, but God, in his grace and his mercy for this faithful servant, at least lets him see it. One of the last things that Moses gets to see is the future of these people. I don't know about you, but I find that to be incredibly beautiful. And for the people of Israel to lose Moses, this has got to be a devastating loss to them, right? I mean, this generation in particular, this is the generation that grew up in the wilderness. The only leader they've ever known is Moses. And now he's gone, and the people mourn for his loss. But when the time of mourning is finally over, oh man, it's time. It is finally time. What was supposed to be a 2-year journey got morphed into a 40-year journey, and now finally that journey is coming to an end. The people of Israel are about to go and take the promised land of God. But it's really interesting to consider this generation of people. Right? This is a generation of people that grew up in that wilderness, that grew up in the period of that wandering. From about the time that they're born until now, they've never really got to see some of the stuff that the generation before them got to witness. When we think about all the cool things that happened in the book of Exodus, that all took place for the generation before them. They got to see God move in wild ways, but this generation hasn't yet. They've not been able to see some of the ways that God has moved in these lives. All they've had are the stories, right? Because as parents, as grandparents, one of our favorite things to do with our kids and grandkids is to do what? Tell them stories of the way that things used to be. Tell them stories about the things that we experienced in our lives, right? I mean, I don't know a grandparent alive that doesn't like to tell me about how they had to walk to class barefoot up one hill and down the other in 6 inches of snow. I don't believe that to be true for a second, but my grandpa always liked to tell me that. But my grandpa dropped out after 8th grade, so. But we love to tell the stories of us growing up. And so you got to think that as part of that telling these kids these stories about what God did through them, you got to think, I'd bet every cent that I would ever even think about owning in my life, that at least 1,000 times they were told about the time that God parted the Red Sea. You could practically picture them telling it to him, right? We were coming down there and we were up against the water, and all of a sudden we look and there's the Egyptians and they're chasing after us, and we're all freaking out, man. We're like, Moses, did you just bring us out here to die? We were a little dramatic at that age, we know, but But then old Moses, man, calm as a cucumber, he just raised his hands, and boom, the water parted. And we were blown away by that. But man, the coolest thing was as we walked across, the ground was so dry, I didn't get dirt on my new Jordans at all. You got to think that it's the kind of story that gets told so often, like at the big family gatherings for holiday dinners and stuff like that, that everybody finishes the last line of it in unison because they've heard it so many times. And we walked on dry ground. Sure, Grandpa. But for all these kids, it's just the stories they were told. They haven't experienced what God has done for these people. They haven't seen it with their own eyes. They've only been told the stories over and over again. For these kids, man, everything is intangible for them. It's all mom and dad's story. It's all grandma and grandpa's story. It's not my story. But now Joshua is taking us to the promised land. The land that we've been told our entire lives has been promised to us for over 500 years. We've waited half a millennia for this to happen, and when they're getting ready to go, Joshua gives them an indication that something big is about to take place. It says in Joshua chapter 3, verse 5, "Then Joshua said to the people, 'Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you.'" That word consecrate is such a great word. Right, the word itself actually means to prepare for what's about to happen, to get yourselves ready for something that God is going to do in you. It's preparation for a religious experience. And so these people know that when Joshua tells them to consecrate yourselves, because tomorrow God is going to do something crazy, you can almost feel the anticipation. For the first time in their lives, they're going to get to see God move in a big way. But God doesn't really veil them what's going to happen. He tells them exactly what's going to happen because Joshua is given something specific to say to the priests. They're told to bring the Ark of the Covenant out, the symbol of the presence of God amongst the people. And it says in verse 8, "And as for you, command the priests who bear the Ark of the Covenant, when you come to the brink of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan." Really think about that for a second, will you please? Consider what God has just told them to do. This generation of priests who have served God, yes, but have never really experienced God, have just been told by God, go stand in the middle of a river. I'm sorry, what? And we're going to learn in a couple of verses that at this point in time, the Jordan is actually overflowing. It's the harvest season, so there's even more water in there than there normally is. And I don't know what you know about the Jordan River, but even at its lower points, it's still a pretty wide and powerful river when the currents are going strong enough. And God just told him, go stand in the middle of that. I guess we're going to find out if this God's for real or not. But he tells them a little bit further as to why he wants them to stand there. And we find out in verse 13. It says, "And when the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from flowing, and the waters coming down from above shall stand in one heap." Kind of sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? I mean, it's not parting the river, but it's still stopping the natural flow of water. A river that's been running for thousands of years is going to stop for us? Boy, this sounds an awful lot like what Grandpa used to tell us. Here's the thing. They know the stories. They know them inside and out, backwards and forwards. They probably even did coloring papyrus. I don't know. But up till now, it's just been stories. They have no real reason to believe that this is going to happen. They haven't had the experience with God that the generation before them has had. All they're being told is that this is going to happen. So there's got to be at least one guy in the entire crowd who's like, yeah, right. I'm going to be the last one in the river, right? But either way, there's an air building amongst these people. an air of anticipation because we know that something is going to happen. We know that we're about to have a definitive moment of finding out whether or not that the God our grandparents and our parents have told us about and told us story after story about, we're going to find out if this God is for real or if it's all just been stories. We're about to have the most tangible evidence we've ever had as a generation as to whether or not God is a real thing. And so you got to think that as the priests make their way through the camp carrying the ark, every single eyeball is watching. You could hear a pin drop in the sand because everybody wants to see what's going to happen. And as they're nearing that water, as their feet are getting ever so close to the banks of that river, everybody's electrified with anticipation for what's going to happen next. Up until this moment, it's all just been a story. Up until this moment, they've never had an experience of their own. Everything could be just dismissed as a legend up until this moment. But as soon as those priests' feet hit the water, God leaves no room for doubt. It says in verses 15 to 17, and as soon as those bearing the ark had come as far as the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped into the brink of the water, now the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest, the waters coming down from above stood and rose up in a heap very far away. What does a heap of water look like? It's weird. At Adam, the city beside Zarethan, and those flowing down to the Sea of the Arabeth, the Salt Sea, were completely cut off. And the people passed over opposite Jericho. Now the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel was passing over on dry ground until all the nation finished passing over the Jordan. It is one thing to know the stories of God. It is one thing to know all the things that the Bible has to tell us about, all the stories, all the characters. It's one thing to know that. It is a whole other kettle of fish to experience God for yourself. Some of you in here this week are here because mom and dad or grandma and grandpa made sure that you were in church every single week. That was the top priority they have. And they may be long gone by now, but they still instilled that in you, that it's important for you to go to church, but it's always been their thing. Maybe they went a step further and they told you about the times in their lives that God has shown up for. Maybe they told you about the very moment that they knew that Jesus was real, that he was the Savior of the world, that he was their Savior, that he had died for their sins, but it's always been their story. It's never truly been yours. A lot of people are what I like to call generational Christians. And what I mean by that is that, well, grandma was a Christian, dad was a Christian, I must be a Christian. But it's always been disconnected. It's been something that you go through the motions of, but you've never experienced God for yourself. Maybe you went to Sunday school every week. Maybe you had the flannel graphs of all the cool stories. Maybe you had the cool story of the Red Sea being parted played out for you. Maybe you did the coloring book pages. Maybe you watched the VeggieTales episode. But it's never been your story before. You've never experienced God for yourself. Can I tell you that at a certain point, it can't be mom's faith. It can't be dad's faith. At a certain point, it has to become your faith. And once you experience God, it changes everything. And so the question that we have to ask, right, we always have to ask this question is how? How am I supposed to experience God? How am I supposed to experience a being that is spirit and divine and supernatural and not tangible, not physical like everything else in our world, right? How do we experience something that we cannot see, taste, touch, or feel? And here's the thing. I think it's a lot simpler than we make it out to be. I don't mean that to sound like I'm trying to make fun of you or anything like that. I think we kind of get in our heads that we need to see that supernatural experience, but the reality is that God reveals himself to us when first we pursue him. So many people, as a pastor, a minister, I get to hear the stories of how people encounter God, and I love hearing them, so please don't stop telling me them because I love it. I get goosebumps every time. It's fantastic. But so many of those stories usually revolve around the same things. I had a crisis going on in my life. Everything went wrong. We ran out of money. My husband, my wife, my mother, my father got diagnosed. Everything in my life just felt like it was crashing around me. And so I felt like I had nowhere else to turn. So I turned to God. And shocker, once they pursued God, God showed up. And he moved in such a mighty way that it changed everything for them. They experienced God for the first time because they first pursued him. And so often that's where we kind of lose track of it. We kind of expect God to come to us. And sometimes God does that, yeah. Sometimes God will intervene himself in ways that we don't understand. But most of the time, God wants us to pursue him. And his word is clear that if we seek him, we will find him when we seek for it with all our heart. Over and over again, God is faithful to us that once we try to seek him out, pursue him genuinely, he reveals himself to each and every one of us. As much as this new generation of Israelites got to see that once you see God in action for yourself, it changes everything, because then it's no longer their story, or it's no longer mom's story, or it's no longer grandpa's story. Then it becomes my story. And our story gets interwoven with the story that God has been telling since the dawn of time, since the very beginning that we talked about way back in January. Once you experience God, nothing is ever the same again. And some of you in here know that. You know what it's like to experience God. Some of you in here know what it's like to experience his grace and his mercy and his love for you. But it's been a while. Maybe you're walking through what feels like a spiritual dry point in your life. Man, all your best stories of God happened years ago. Can I ask you this question? When's the last time you pursued him? Right? I could probably live in my marriage and just assume that everything's great because I pursued Mandy the one time. She said I do, and I said got you, and that was it. And that'd be fine. Okay, maybe not to her. But if I want my marriage to grow, if I want it to continue to solidify, then that means I got to keep pursuing her. I got to keep trying to find time to talk with her. I got to keep trying to make time to spend with her. It's so easy for us to just kind of lose track of our relationship with God. We get so wrapped up in everything else that's going on around us. We get so wrapped up in the minutia of life, the mediocrity of life sometimes, the constant cycle of day in, day out stuff that we kind of forget to pursue God. And so if you've been walking through what feels like a dry phase in your spirituality, let me remind you, pursue him. He is faithful. He'll show back up, and then all of a sudden your stories aren't from 5, 10, 15 years ago. They're from yesterday. They're from earlier today. Because you kept pursuing him, because you kept investing in that relationship. You've heard me say, you'll hear me say it again. Every relationship in your life, including your relationship with God, is doing one of two things. It's either growing or it's dying. They don't stay the same. And the way that you continue to grow any relationship, and yes, your relationship with God is included here, is to make time for that relationship. to pursue him, to chase after him, because you know already that when you pursue God, when you chase after him, God, in his faithfulness and in his love, is going to show up, and he's going to do so in a mighty way. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16 says this, and we'll close with it. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need.